All right, let's jump right into colonial Burma. I'm so ready to dig into these excerpts from Burmese Days that you brought, trying to figure out what makes these characters tick, you know?
Absolutely. It's going to be fun.
Well, like a deep dive, not just like WHO they are, but how they act and relate to each other under British rule, right?
Totally. And going right to Orwell's writing, like these passages, it's like a window into how he saw things back then.
Okay, so first up, a character that seems to show both the good and bad of power. Upokini. The way Orwell talks about his rise, well, it's not a happy story, is it? Cunning, ruthless, corrupt, but like, is there more to his badness than meets the eye?
Well, the thing about Yupo Keen is that he's not just a typical villain. He's really good at manipulating the system, using it for himself. He's clever enough to work both sides, using British ways and Burmese traditions too.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder, is he a result of the system or just super clever at taking advantage?
He's like a chameleon, right? Blends in wherever he can get the most power. And there's that line about him being like a crocodile. He has the cunning of the crocodile. It's cruelty, it's bestiality. Like, wow, that's intense.
Yeah.
But it
Yeah.
makes you think, who's really the predator here in this whole colonial world?
Hmm. That question sticks with you throughout the book.
Yeah.
It's not just like good guys versus bad guys. Orwell makes you face the messy side of power, how people can be both victims and the ones doing the hurting in a corrupt system.
Totally. Speaking of complicated characters, let's move to Flory. He's like our main guy, but he's not the perfect hero. You feel his inner struggle, you know? Hating the system, but still part of it.
Yeah, he's caught between two worlds, seeing the unfairness of it all, but also benefiting from it.
Hmm.
Hates the racism and fakeness of the British community, but still wants them to accept him.
Right, it's that contradiction that makes him interesting. He's like what colonialism does to a person,
Hmm.
personified. We see glimmers of good, especially with Dr. Veeraswamy, but then the casual racism wanting to fit in at the club.
Hmm.
Is there even hope for a guy like Flory?
That's the big question Orwell throws at us. He has moments of seeing the truth, but then nothing changes.
Mm.
Sees the need for change, but not brave enough to actually do anything.
Mm.
It's kind of sad, stuck in the system he hates.
Yeah. His drinking and that song, Bloody, Bloody Hole, almost feels like a cry for help.
Hmm.
Like expressing frustration without dealing with the real problem.
Trying to find comfort instead of facing the
Yeah.
big issues, yeah. And his thing with Dr. Veeraswamy shows us, too. He values their friendship, but when it comes to supporting him joining the club, he hesitates, scared of what people will say.
There's that line where he's thinking about what'll happen if he supports Dr. Veeraswamy. No, he could not face that row. It was not worth it. Like, it shows how strong those social rules are, even for someone who sees they're wrong.
Right.
He chooses comfort over doing what's right. It's like he gets even more stuck in the system he hates.
Exactly. And this leads to another layer, the women in Flory's life. There's Mahalame, his Burmese mistress, and then Elizabeth, who just came from England. Each relationship shows a different side of how power works in this colonial setting.
It's a stark difference, right? Mahlame, beautiful, subservient, and Elizabeth representing going back to Flory's own culture, maybe a chance for a more proper relationship.
Yeah.
But you see, his attraction to Elizabeth is tied to her being white, being English. It's like he's playing into the same hierarchy he claims to hate.
It shows how personal desires are shaped by the bigger societal forces. Flory wants a real connection, but those biases, those expectations from back then are still there. He sees Malame through a lens of exoticism, like she's a possession, while Elizabeth is the familiar, the acceptable choice.
And then there's that part where Malame like throws herself at Flory's feet, begging for his love.
Yeah.
It's rough. It's colonialism mixed with how men and women were treated back then, pushing women like her further down.
It's like Orwell uses a small moment to show a big issue, right? Her bowing down isn't just personal, it shows the imbalance of power in colonial Burma. She's a victim of a system that devalues her culture, her gender, her very being.
And Flory, even though he says he cares for her, he's part of that problem. He sees the injustice, but he benefits from it, even in his personal life. It's like, can you really fight a system when you're taking part in the ways it oppresses people, even on a personal level?
It's a question that hangs over Flory throughout the book. That constant struggle inside him, wanting personal happiness, but having to make moral compromises to keep his place in colonial society.
Now, like, talk about a place that's like a mini version of that whole society, the British Club. It's like this pressure cooker of boredom, gin, and just casual racism. Reading it makes you feel kind of suffocated.
Yeah, it's more than just a place to hang out. It represents British colonialism itself. Inside those walls, everything is about racial hierarchy and sticking to traditions. The stuffy air, the dumb arguments over drinks, The way they treat the Burmese servants, it shows how empty the whole colonial thing really is.
And that line from Ellis when they're debating about letting Dr. Veeraswamy in. What I'm saying is that we don't want to see any black hides in this club. It's so blatant. It's like,
Straight up racism.
yeah, and it shows the deep-seated prejudice that's in everything the colonizers do.
It reminds you that colonialism wasn't just about economics and politics. It was about making one race seem better than another. The club embodies that, with its unspoken rules and keeping people out. It's a place where white supremacy isn't just allowed, it's celebrated.
And Flory, again, doesn't do a thing. Sees this awful racism, this disregard for people, and stays silent. He's stuck because he's scared of being an outcast, of losing his place in the system.
His silence speaks volumes, you know. It shows how sneaky power can be, how it can even get to people who might otherwise have good intentions. Flory wants to belong more than he wants to do what's right. It shows how hard it is to make the right choices in oppressive systems.
But that whole image of stability the club tries to project, it can't last forever. You can feel the tension building in Burmese society. And then, bam, a riot, sparked by Ellis's actions. It's pure chaos, and it shows how fragile that control really is. What do you think Orwell's trying to say with that sudden explosion of violence?
It's like a wake-up call, right? It shatters the illusion of control the British built. It shows all that resentment bubbling under the surface, the anger from years of oppression. Suddenly, the Europeans are vulnerable, seeing how shaky their power really is, how much anger they've ignored.
It's like ripping off a mask, exposing everything raw and real underneath. And Flory, trying to protect Elizabeth in the chaos, shows a bit of courage. But it's too late. The damage is done.
Yeah. What he does in the riot matters. It shows he can be compassionate, brave, but it also highlights how he's stuck in the system. He tries to protect Elizabeth, but he's still operating within that same framework of power that creates the injustice he hates.
It's like a turning point, isn't it? Things change between colonizers and colonized, and it sets off a chain of events that leads to tragedy for a few characters, especially Flory.
Definitely. And that's where we'll pick up next time. We'll see how they deal with the riot's aftermath, all of Upokeen's schemes, and the choices that lead to Flory's downfall.
Sounds heavy.
Yeah, there's so much more to uncover about these characters. Orwell uses them to critique not just colonialism, but power itself, prejudice, what it means to be human, all those big questions. After the riot, you really see how shaky the British hold on Burma is. People in power, like Upokeen, use the chaos to get what they want. Like when there's a power vacuum, the people who are best at using fear and division, they're the ones who rise up, right?
Yeah, totally. It's like the riot gives Upokeen the perfect chance to make himself even more important in the colonial system. He goes after Dr. Veeraswamy, spreading lies, manipulating the legal stuff to trash the doctor's reputation. It's scary how easily truth can be twisted around for someone's own gain.
What gets me is how Dr. Veeraswamy, such an honest, intelligent guy, is totally helpless against these attacks. It's like a reminder that even good people can get crushed by a system that's rigged against them. He represents all those people whose voices are silenced by the colonial machine, you know?
Yeah, it's like the system itself is designed to keep those power imbalances in place. It's not just about controlling people physically, but mentally too, making certain groups feel inferior so their voices don't matter. And the British Club, it's like the stage where all this absurdity plays out. Remember the stifling atmosphere, the casual racism, the pointless arguments over drinks? It all shows how morally bankrupt colonial life was. Like they're living in a bubble, totally disconnected from the real Burma.
And don't forget about Verrill. He arrives all smug, expecting everyone to love and obey him. He completely disregards the local culture, treats servants like dirt. Remember how he kicks the club butler for bringing him a warm drink? Just casually cruel.
Yeah, it's shocking. It's like Verrill's a caricature of everything bad about colonialism, and then Elizabeth falls for him. It's like she's attracted to his status, what he represents socially. It's sad because you feel like she might actually care for Flory.
Her choosing to marry Verrill speaks volumes about the pressures on women back then. Marriage was often about security, financial, and social. Elizabeth, being new to Burma, is probably looking for stability, wanting to fit in.
It's tragic. It highlights how even people who don't necessarily agree with colonialism can still play a part in keeping those hierarchies in place. And this brings us back to Flory. He can't help Dr. Veeraswamy, Elizabeth rejects him, and everything around him is falling apart. He's basically drowning in the very system he's trying to navigate.
It's clear that Orwell wants to show the psychological damage of colonialism. Flory's story isn't just about the choices he makes. It's about the pressure to conform, the fear of being rejected, the weight of those colonial expectations. There's this passage that always strikes me, where Florey's watching the Burmese praying to the gnats, the spirits of the forest. They're asking for good luck on a hunting trip. And it's such a different world from the British club.
Right, it's like a reminder that there's this whole other world existing alongside the colonial one, full of tradition, spirituality, and a deep connection to the land.
A world the British mostly ignore or dismiss. They're so caught up in their own bubble that they miss the beauty and complexity of Burmese culture. It shows how colonialism blinded people to what was right in front of them.
And Flory, even though he seems drawn to that other world, can't fully escape his colonial upbringing. He's watching the Burmans pray, and he says they're praying to him to bring us good luck. He says us, putting himself with the colonizers, even while surrounded by this ancient ritual.
It's such a small detail, but it's powerful, right? It shows how deep that colonial mindset ran. Flory, despite recognizing some things, can't break free. It's sad because you can see how much he wants something real, something more than the fake world of colonialism. His relationship with Matlamé shows that too. She represents a different way of life, a connection to the land, a sense of belonging that he craves.
But he can't fully embrace it.
He's too stuck in his own head, trapped by the pressures of colonial society. It's a missed opportunity, a tragedy that shows the real human cost of colonialism. Not just the violence and exploitation, but the emotional and spiritual damage done to everyone involved.
Back again for our final look at Burmese days. Wow, what a journey it's been, eh? These characters, colonial Burma, so much to think about. As we wrap up, I'm curious, what's really struck you so far? What stuck with you?
You know, one thing that keeps hitting me is that Orwell doesn't just show colonialism as like boots on the ground. He goes deeper into the mental side, how it messes with your thinking, relationships, even who you think you are, like with Flory and his self-hate, trying to be attracted to Burmese culture, but with that British superiority thing always there.
That struggle inside him is so real, isn't it? Like, he shows what happens when you compromise in an oppressive system, how it eats away at you. Reminds me of shooting an elephant, actually.
Oh, yeah, good point. Both stories have characters trapped by what people expect, doing things that go against what they believe, wanting to do right, but the system's pressure is huge.
It's like they see the injustice, but feel helpless to change it. So let's talk about endings. Flory's suicide. Man, that's bleak. What do you think Orwell's saying with that? Like, you can't escape the system no matter what.
It's definitely a tragic ending, no happy ending there. It does suggest that in this system, escape is almost impossible.
Ruh.
Flory killing himself, it comes from all that corruption, that pressure of colonial life. No way out, no hope for change, at least that's how H.E. sees it. Makes you think about what living under that kind of pressure does to a person.
Yeah. And it's extra sad because you see glimmers of good in him, trying to connect with Dr. Verswamy, trying to protect Elizabeth, but it's not enough to fight off the darkness that takes over.
His story, though, it makes you think about taking responsibility even when the system's awful. Like, yeah, there's pressure to fit in, but Flory's downfall shows we got to resist those forces that try to dehumanize us. Can't just blame the system. Got to make choices that match our values, even when it's tough.
Right. Like, even in a messed up system like colonialism, people still have a choice. They can resist, fight for what's right, no matter the cost. Flory not doing that, that's what leads to the end for him.
Now, thinking about Burmese days and all of Orwell's work, one thing that keeps popping up is the misuse of power. Whether it's like dictators in 1984 or the sneaky hierarchies here, he's always looking at how power corrupts, silences people, and keeps injustice going.
And he does it in a way that pulls you in, doesn't he? The descriptions in Burmese days are so real you can feel the heat, the smells, everything. It's not just some abstract idea, it's about how these systems affect real people, everyday life.
Exactly. He's a master at showing the personal inside the political. He makes you confront the human cost of these messed up ways of thinking, how they twist not just societies, but people's very souls. And he uses such strong, vivid language. You're right there in that world, feeling the history, almost touching it.
And that dark humor he throws in, it's like a sharp jab that shows how ridiculous these situations are. Makes you want to laugh at the craziness, even while seeing the tragedy underneath it.
He blends wit and social commentary like no other. So, as we wrap up our deep dive into Burmese days, what's the one thought you want to leave our listener with? What's the big takeaway from all this?
For me, it's that these things, power, prejudice, fighting for your own integrity, they're not just stuck in the past, they're everywhere, always part of being human. But maybe by seeing them, understanding them, we can start to untangle the mess.
That's where real change starts.
Yeah.
Right? Becoming aware, thinking critically, and having the guts to challenge the way things are even when it's uncomfortable.
Totally. So for anyone listening, keep thinking about this as you read Burmese Days. Where do you see this stuff happening in the world today? How does power, prejudice, compromise show up in our own lives?
And when you run into characters like Yupo Keen or Flory, ask yourself, are WE any less likely to fall for power's tricks or the pressure to fit in? It makes you connect Orwell's story with how complicated things are in our own reality.
Burmese Days gives us this lens to look at these human struggles that never seem to go away, and it makes us think about our own choices, our responsibility in systems of power and privilege.
It's a story that sticks with you long after you close the book. It makes you think about your own choices and how we can build a world that's more fair and just.
Thanks for coming along on this deep dive into Burmese Days. It's been an amazing trip, and we hope it makes you want to keep exploring, keep asking questions, and never stop thinking.